I heard the screaming before I even got out of the car. Not the movie kind, not sharp and clean, but a ragged, steady sound like something had been torn inside someone's chest and never stitched back together. The kind of sound that vibrates your ribs before your brain figures out what your ears are telling it. I sat there for 2 seconds, engine humming, my hand on the gear shift, and then something very small and very old in me decided I wasn't going to be the kind of person who drove away from that noise. It was coming from down the street near the garages. Camille's garage. You should know Camille. She's been coming to my house every other Tuesday for 6 years, with the same blue tote that had a zipper she promised to fix, and I swear it was the most honest, broken little bag in the world, like her life was in there, and so was a map of how to be decent. She knows my kids' birthdays. She stayed 3 extra hours once at midnight because a pipe burst and she couldn't in good conscience leave a house full of water. No extra charge. She just couldn't leave people drowning in a problem if she could stop it. I am not someone who does confrontation. I smile at people I don't like. I put groceries back where they don't belong because I'm embarrassed to ask a store clerk where they go. But that sound, "Someone please," cut through all the polite muscle in my chest like a cold knife. I ran. I found her in that narrow, stupid little space between the garage and the fence, the kind of place you forget exists until something awful is shoved into it. She was on the concrete knees, pulled in face, streaked with dried salt from crying eyes, squinting like she'd been underground too long, and someone had finally cracked the lid. The padlock on the garage door was broken into 2 pieces on the ground, and the air coming out of the open doorway smelled like stale heat and fear. And standing in the doorway of the house, arms folded like she was supervising lawn clippings, was Linda. Linda had been the HOA president for 9 years. You know, the type, precise, patient, proud, in a way that tips into menace. She measured people's grass with a level. She loved her little stacks of violation notices the way other people loved golf trophies. She wore a tight smile that was not meant to make people comfortable. It was meant to remind them who she was. She had watched Camille pull up on her first day with that quiet, not a care about anyone's life look. By evening, there was a handwritten note in my mailbox demanding proof of authorization for my contractor for my cleaner, as if she could paperworkize humanity into neat little boxes. When I broke that padlock with a landscaping rock and the door swung open, Camille's relief wasn't loud. It was a soft, collapsing kind of cry. I crouched down, put my hand on her shoulder, told her she was okay, and for a second, all the world was the two of us and the hum of my engine and the way light spilled into that dusty garage like a promise. Then the human theater resumed. Linda said in her exact clipped way that she had acted within her rights, that Camille was on private property without permission. She used the word documentation like it was a talisman. I call this the power of practice. Linda had practiced making people small for 9 years. She'd accumulated folders with names, dates, photos, literal dossiers, the kind of meticulous cruelty that only works if everyone else keeps their mouths shut and their lawns trimmed. But that day she miscalculated. Maybe she'd assumed I'd play the part of the quiet, invisible neighbor. Maybe she thought everyone else still owed her silence. I didn't move from between Camille and Linda. I said a few words into my phone to the 911 dispatcher, clear and calm, because I knew everything that mattered would be recorded. A woman unlawfully detained, address need for medical attention, person responsible, still on premises. Camille leaned against the wall and gripped my arm like an anchor. Her hands were shaking so hard I could feel it through my sleeve. The police showed up in 11 minutes. It felt like both an eternity and the speed of salvation. 2 officers, then paramedics, then the clinical procedural tone of someone trained to unflinchingly collect facts. Linda didn't panic. She started speaking, and that was mistake number 2. She explained with the kind of focus cold people use to defend themselves before they admit anything soft how Camille had been intercepted because of parking violations. She called locking the garage securing the area, like words can be used to make brutality sound like administration. The officer asked one simple question. Did she ask to leave? The truth. Camille had begged to go, had asked, had said please is small and heavy and human. It took Linda a second to decide whether to lie and whether she could quantify refusal like a form. She chose strategy over shame and said no. They didn't handcuff her. They cited her photograph, the lock took statements. But the officers left with the sort of quiet that didn't dissolve the problem, it only paused it. This is the part of the story where I need to tell you about the neighbor you never expected to matter. For 8 years, Mr. Alvarez, 78, retired electrician, lived 2 houses down, had been the person who watered his lawn and read the paper and looked like he was doing nothing more dangerous than enjoying the sunset. He also liked gadgets. The day Linda decided to intercept Camille, Mr. Alvarez had forgotten to turn off his doorbell camera when he left for bingo. He returned to a timeline of footage, Linda approaching, talking to Camille at my driveway, walking in front of the garage, blocking the doorway. The camera captured the whole thing, the securing language, Camille pressing the padlock, being affixed to the door. When I learned about that footage later, when the neighborhood was a mix of people at the edge of outrage and stunned, silent neighbors, I realized the twist we'd all been waiting for had already happened. The person who finally refused to be quiet wasn't a fiery activist or a televised lawyer. It was an old man who liked gadgets and left his camera on. He uploaded the video, shared it with a neighbor who played it at an HOA meeting, and suddenly the spreadsheets in the folders didn't look like evidence of civilization. They looked like the paperwork of someone who'd been trying to build a case against anyone she didn't like. Camille pressed charges. The HOA meeting that had been an exercise in ritualized fear turned into an open, messy accounting. Stories came out, petty vindictiveness turned habitual neighbors who had shrunk away from Linda's gaze, days spent measuring the height of hedges instead of watching a sick person get help. The vote was emphatic, 9-2. Linda was removed. 8 months later. Outside a courthouse, Camille exhaled in a way that made me think of someone letting water out of a balloon. She smiled, small and real, like someone who had been given back the right to breathe. She still cleans my house every other Tuesday, same blue tote, new zipper, and parks wherever she wants. Linda moved away. The folders were meaningless boxes that no longer had a person to translate them into punishment. Justice had the satisfying, low-key feeling of the world tipping back toward balance. But here's the part I don't want you to miss. The thing that stuck in my chest long after the police lights and the neighborhood whispers, faded power doesn't survive on strength. It survives on silence. Linda's rules worked because people were invisible to her until they weren't. Small, ordinary compliance created a kingdom she could rule. It wasn't a conspiracy so much as an accumulation, unchallenged petty cruelties, then bigger cruelties, then a lock slammed on a human being. The moral, and I hate the word moral because I don't want to sound like I'm lecturing, is this: don't get used to being small. There's a difference between being peaceful and being mute when someone's dignity is on the line. Courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's the old man who leaves his camera on. Sometimes it's the neighbor who finally shows up at a meeting. Sometimes it's the person who calls 911 instead of hoping someone else will. Those small, noisy acts add up to interruption. They stop the practice of cruelty before it becomes a design. If there's any poetic justice here, it's quiet and thick. Linda's downfall didn't come from a single grand reveal or a viral campaign. It came from accumulation, from a camera left on, from neighbors remembering, from a woman refusing to be minimized. That more than the citation or the meeting felt like the payoff, the moment when the built-up pressure of 9 years of small abuses found a release valve. People always want neat endings. So here's what happens next in mine. Camille goes back to being Camille, her tote, her jokes about the zipper, the way she hums under her breath while she works. Mr. Alvarez goes to bingo and tweaks his camera angles. The HOA learns the hard lesson that rules without humanity are just instruments of cruelty. I keep thinking about the 2 seconds I sat in my car, how easy it would have been to keep my hands on the wheel, to tell myself it wasn't my problem. That thought still tastes sour. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Not because I don't think justice is important, but because the line between right and wrong is slippery when power wears a smile, when you see someone wielding rules like a weapon. Do you speak up and risk the awkwardness, or do you stay invisible and keep your life tidy? Is the risk of becoming one of the people who stops a wrong worth more than the quiet comfort of a perfectly trimmed lawn? If you've been through something like this, an abuse of small power that grew until it hurt someone, tell me about it. Do you think the neighbors did enough? Would you have stepped between the garage and that locked door? Drop a comment with your opinion. Tell us what you'd do, or share a story about when silence broke and something right finally happened. If this moved, You share it with someone who needs that reminder. Being small isn't a virtue when it lets cruelty grow. And if nothing else, check your cameras, check on your people, and for once, just once, be the neighbor who refuses to be quiet.
Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video. Cảm ơn các bạn đã xem video.